broader community by developing college-wide events and activities and building in calls to action to eliminate systemic racism and social injustice. The Navigating a Polarized World series was developed to help students learn how to be objective and thoughtful consumers of information in an increasingly polarized society, as well as how to have productive conversations with individuals who may have differing or opposing views. And with that, I am pleased to announce Dr. Derek Williams, who will be doing the spin zones and echo chambers presentation.
Thank you all. I want to first thank John and Matt for considering me and allowing me this space to share. And I'm glad that we have a great group of people here, and I'll get right into it. The first thing I'm gonna do is just contextualize our conversation. I'm not here to talk at you, but I wanna talk with you. Wisdoms and I believe in wisdom in crowds. So allow me just a little bit to just contextualize and set up what we want to talk about today in terms of spin zones, echo chambers, and the like. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I have a few slides I would like for us to take a look at. I'm going to just blow it up here so everyone will be able to take it out. Okay. Welcome to Spin Zones and Echo Chambers. And today we're going to look at these two dimensions, and we're going to talk about it from a communication lens. And I'll explain that in detail in just a second. So what are spin zones and echo chambers before we get started? I know a lot of us have probably heard of these concepts, kind of have a working understanding of these concepts. But essentially, I want to just kind of iterate what we are talking about today. So, of course, we know that spin zones are like a political slant or bias. You're going to hear that word a lot today, the word bias, and I'll mention that a little bit further along in the discussion. The second is echo chambers. So echo chambers basically is an environment where individual groups only encounter information and opinions that reflect and reinforce their own existing viewpoints. And we'll talk a little bit about that as well. Now, one of the objectives that we would like to cover today are simply three simple things. The first is we want to look at how did we get here? How did we get to such a polarized world or society that we're currently are in, where discussion, conversation is frowned upon for name calling and those different types of things. The second thing is from here to there. So hopefully what I can do as a communication scholar is to give you kind of like an overview of the chronological history of how we got from here to, having dialogue conversations to where we are right now currently, where when we hear something that opposes our viewpoint, we are taught to vilify that individual or their ideas. And then the last one, it will be our conversation. Where do we go from here? All right, so let's get into it. It's really important to clarify what we mean by communication, because communication when we do communication research is usually kind of explained in what I call an interchangeable way. You probably see the term communication with S, communications, and communication without the S. So essentially, what type of scholar I am, I'm a communication studies scholar without the S. And basically, some of the things that I look at in my class and my research deals with interpretation of information, how we use words, language, how we act upon that information, exchange of information, human interaction, and nonverbal communication. Now, a subset of that is what is known as mass communication. So mass communication is what Marshall McLuhan calls the medium. That's the communication or the technology or apparatuses that we use to effectively communicate. So to think about this, mass communication looks at the medium, i.e. we're here at this WebEx, and so our devices, our phones, our laptops, those are all what we would consider like mass communication. How do we communicate across using digital technology, examines communication channels and distribution of messages. Now, the communication on your left-hand side deals with the human interaction. Again, looking at how we create culture and how we have interpersonal small group dialogue and the like. So it's really important that we understand the communication. So let's look at a timeline to where we are currently today. And as you can see, we have two arrows that's pointing towards our center, which looks at the internet, looks at technology, and we are currently in this state as we speak. We know about the Gutenberg's printing press and the revolutionary change that did as far as disseminating information. And then we get the telegraph and the importance of that. For the large time, oral communication, communicating amongst each other, that was the main mode of interpreting messages and sending messages. Then we look on the other side, we see the radio era. We can think of the fireside chat with President Roosevelt and the importance of that. Then we move into the television era. Television era gets us where we can have a shared experience and watch the television. Like most people remember, my father included, where they were when JFK was assassinated. Which brings us to today, the internet and the digital revolution that took place in the early 80s. And we're seeing these things kind of transform the way that we communicate. So that's a short timeline of mass communication and where we've gone. Now, here is two images. One is of William Buckley, who is a conservative and really is the father of what we would consider the conservative thought for the probably the last 50 years. And on the other side, we see James Baldwin, one of the greatest essayists that America has produced, and really kind of the subset of what we call, or what people consider now, critical race theory, looking at things through the prism of this kind of structures of race. Now, the reason why I'm sharing this, you all, and for us to kind of look at this, is that these two individuals had a debate. They had a debate on Cambridge campus, and it was a debate that was attended where it was standing room only, and the debate was actually televised. Now, after we're done today, it'll be great if you, and it's on YouTube, you can kind of go look at the actual debate. But what it was a very, what I would call a very cordial debate, although the two individuals diametrically opposed each other's viewpoints and standpoints. You didn't see them like shouting each other down, calling each other's names, berating them. And it was basically an exchange of ideas. And another thing too, we began to see nuance here, where it isn't placed in this kind of soundbite, 30 seconds to respond, shock value. So it was a real kind of slow and deliberate way of looking at opposing ideas and countering them and coming up with factual evidence. Brings us back to the television era. Walter Cronkite, for 20 years, from 1941 to about, of 1961, excuse me, to about 1982, Walter Cronkite was one of the most trusted individuals when we talk about news source and disseminate information. Now, we can be critical of this model by saying that, yes, the model as it was, this one singular form of communication being spiraled down to everyone else. What about dissenting voices, diversity of voices from race, gender, sexual orientation, social positions? So this could be critique, but one of the things is that when individuals tuned in to hear Walter Cronkite there was an established baseline for what we would consider the facts or defining or framing the conversation, be it that you agreed or disagreed. And we see investigation journalism at its best. What happened here when we talk about the big three, we see ABC News, NBC, CBS, what I just mentioned with Walter Cronkite. Families from across the nation could join in and watch what was going on, like it was a singular type of media. And you would have that conversation with family. It would extend out to your community, into your job. Those different types of things was really an important source of communication. Now, what happened out of that, you all, came the rise of the 24-hour news cycle. On my left is Ted Turner, the founder of CNN News, and Roger L. is on the right, the brains of Fox News. Now, why is this important, you all? This is where we begin to see a shift from the local evening news, 30 minutes segmented, dealing with investigative journalism and those things. And we begin to see a shift in this endless cycle. Now, why is Ted Turner important to me? I grew up in Birmingham, which was just 2.5 hours away from Atlanta. I'm going to come back to this point about CNN and how CNN was created when we talk a little bit further. But what happened is that these business moguls, they had to fill the channels with content. So it was cheaper to fill the content on a 24 news cycle with more of what we call like infotainment. So we begin to see this opposed to the hard news of CBS, ABC, NBC. It had a stopping point, right? If you did not catch the late evening news or the nightly news, you would have to rely solely probably on newspapers and those kind of things. And when a medium, a new medium comes into play, the old medium is not done away with. The old medium kind of hangs back in the foreground. We see that with the printing press, newspapers, radios, and television. So all of those mediums are still around. What led to the 24-hour cycle is what we begin to see, mainly baby boomers born from 1946 to 1964, also the silent generation, where television is a main mode of getting source material and information. That was a difference from what we call the greatest generation, where it was more of a print-based, newspapers and those things. And we begin to see the 24-hour cycle take a life of its own into this kind of infotainment, where Walter Cronkite, sure, there's no such thing as objective journalism, but Walter Cronkite would try to present it from an objective lens. That was no longer the case. And a book that I picked up in 2010 is from Allison Dagnes, and it's called Politics on Demand. This is the first time we will be able to get politics slanted in the way that we actually saw politics. So on to my right there, we see Lou Dobbs, who started out at CNN in the early years, and Sean Hannity, who is a popular voice of the right. And we see Rachel Maddow, who is a popular voice of the left, and Don Lemon could be considered left. The reason why I have these three up here, you all, is that this is now a way of people changing from that CBS, ABC, to being able to find the politic or the information that further confirms or kind of slants to the information that they are seeking. What this created, you all, again, is news from more nuance, like what I mentioned, where at the bottom here, you all, this is a local TV affiliation KYW-TV, and is spotlighting Malcolm X. Now, why is this revolutionary? It's revolutionary because back during the time he was being interviewed, Malcolm X and the Nation of Islam was considered very controversial based on like the media and misrepresentations of the sect of Malcolm X. But you can see here, you all, he's having a conversation with Louis Lomax, like a debate style. But these shows were built in a way where they were hour long. Again, Malcolm X is able to state his position. He would have opposition, and that person could respond, not talking over each other and those things. So now we begin to see the rise of the politic on demand, the 24-hour cycle. And at the corner here, we see a CNN. As you can see, the title of the show is called Get to the Point. We don't have time for nuance, get to the point. And then over, we see Geraldo. Geraldo is would be considered like a king of the talking point kind of spectacle culture. We can remember where Geraldo had the chair thrown during one of his television segments with the Ku Klux Klan. So we begin to see this, you all, through the three big markets, CNN, Fox, and MSNBC, where you have a split screen and you have individuals who are on one side and individuals who are on the other. The only difference between what was going on with Face the Nation, Concrete, those different types of media platforms is, again, the nuance. Now, when you tune into these television models, it seems like, you know, professional wrestling is what Chris Hedges prefers to it, where it is sound bites. They're very short and they're very kind of opinionated. So we move from this kind of news presented to this infotainment opinionated, which people tune in based on their preference. Why is all of this important? This is important because it gets us to a theory that we have to understand known as use and gratification theory. This is a communication theory that suggests that we as individuals, because we keep hearing things, the media, and we talk about the media like it's this 100-foot giant in the mountains that control its viewers, and its viewers don't have any subjectivity of agency. But one of the issues is that what we have to think about is that use and gratification theory says that there's an interplay. There's an interplay between the consumer or the viewer as well as the media. So the media tries out things and viewers will decide apparently on what type of media they would like to consume. So it's a constant pull. It's not just this is what the viewing audience wants, or this is the agenda and they're gonna brainwash the audience. It's a give and take. So use and gratification theory is important because it puts us to where we are today. So from here to there is really important that now the generation that was brought up on the television, or we look at viewership. Viewership is going down from the three major news organizations that I mentioned. Their viewership is not as big as it was. Saw a spike in 2016, but they're steadily going down. Now, at the same time, you all, newspapers are going pretty much to the side as well. So we begin to see this, the radio era, although it can be argued that podcasts are kind of an extension of that, but we are reimagined. So the radio era, newspaper radio era, as well as the television era. Now, people are still consuming and getting their news, but they're getting it through social media. It is reported that 40% of individuals now get their information from a social media platform like Facebook. And over here, we begin to see the rise of what we call the layperson or the pundit and those kind of things. On the left here is Joe Rogan, who has millions of followers, and on the right we have Ben Shapiro. So individuals now do not have to go through the big cable markets. They don't have to go to Fox. They don't have to go to a CNN. They could set up in their home with a microphone, laptop, and some digital technology, getting back to mass communication, and communicate to the world and find their viewers. And we know that a lot of information now is consumed through those platforms like Twitter, like Instagram, Snapchat, and TikTok. So this is where we're at currently. Now, what has happened? Well, we always have had spins and echo chambers, as I mentioned, right? The politics on demand. But what we have now is what Eli Prosper calls filter bubbles. And it's actually hiding now, where, you know, on television, it would present, or it could, some people could say it's a performance of an opposing side and a con and a pro side, and have them go at each other. But now with the filter bubble and these digital technologies, you can essentially filter out any type of disagreement or any type of opposing idea that contradicts or even challenges the way that you're thinking. So this is what we call the infotainment, politics on demand is now been heightened. Now, did the filter bubble create this? No, it did not. But like with all technologies or new technologies, it just heightens what has already been in existence. So this is one of the things we see when we see the Great Divide. All right, so information, you all, has gone into this digital deluge, great flood. And information at your fingertips can be a great thing, but it can also be limiting in the scope of trying to understand what's going on. So we go back to that the original models, newspapers, Walter Concrete, that kind of like a slow drip. You can sip on it. You can kind of ponder it, ruminate, think about it, discuss it, to now this endless stream flow of information, which has moved us to the information divide, or what we call disinformation and misinformation. So misinformation is incorrect or misleading or false information, regardless of whether it's intended. That's really important, to mislead or deceive. And then we have the intentional side of incorrect information. It's called false information, which is intended to mislead, especially propaganda issues by government organizations or media, and that can also be by individuals as well. So we see this misinformation and disinformation coming at people from the left, from the right, from every angle, and it's really hard for people to kind of try to find a truth or try to find facts. We're in a world now where the New York Times or the Washington Times has more information in their weekly newspaper than someone in the 17th century would get in a lifetime. And we look at this great deluge, it's really hard for people to kind of gravitate towards information to try to find fact, truth, understanding. Now, cultivation theory is the last theory before I open it up and have the great conversation. There's a great quote that suggests a culture gets what it celebrates. And cultivation theory basically is a theory by George Gardner, who was a mass communication scholar. And essentially the theory suggests that when we only seek out media that confirms what we are thinking, it cultivates a kind of culture of thinking, a kind of way of thinking of things. I'll give a case in point. My grandmother, when I was in school, I would call my grandmother down in Alabama, and I would ask grandma, like, how you doing, grandma? Oh, the world is just awful. It's just, you can't even go outside without being robbed and everything. I was like, grandma, where did you get that from? And it was because my grandmother watched this kind of concise cycle of the 24-hour news, and it concerned her. But what it did, it cultivated her thinking to think that being in that bubble, that the world was actually different, or I mean, the world was actually just how it was presented in media. So that's what cultivation theory does. So when we look at a culture is just individuals who shares attitudes. This is really important. The three big things: a belief system and values. Now I'm going to go to Shrek because Shrek is one of my favorite animated series, and this is what I want to leave us with when we're thinking about our conversation. A culture gets what it celebrates. If anyone is not familiar with Shrek, Shrek is an ogre, and he has a friend by the name Eddie Murphy plays the character who is the donkey. And the donkey is trying to get Shrek to self-disclose. Tell me what ogres like. Ogres are like parfait. Ogres are like cake. And Shrek stops the donkey and basically says, no, ogres are like onions. They have layers. And when we think of culture and we think of conversations and communicating with individuals, they bring their culture to the conversation. And a culture, again, is just a group of individuals with attitudes, a belief system, and value systems. Now, where does the distinction lie when we're talking about disagreement and when we see the kind of echo chambers and the likes? An attitude, again, is just a predisposition, being favorable about something or unfavorable. Then you have a belief system. That's what you believe to be true or false. And then you actually have a value system. That is your core thing, that moral compass that guides you. Usually conversations now don't move past the values, the value to get to the core value thing, because we're in an attitudinal thing where when someone hears buzzwords or someone hears something that they disagree with, their automatic reaction is to shut down or to shut that person down in a conversation. So it's important, you all, in order for us to get to the belief system and the value system, we first have to look at attitudes, and attitudes come from trust, come from conversation and bridge building, some things that we can discuss in our conversation. What has this gotten us towards? Where are we currently at with the media on demand? And now that we talk about, we have media now that we have these filter bubbles, which are heightened echo chambers. It has created, you all, what we call the big sort. And this is a book that was foretold. I read this book, I think in 2007 or so. And Bill Bishop was seeing something during that time. And this was when technology was just starting. And basically he was talking about how like-minded people are starting to even live together, live around each other, where you don't come in contact with anyone that has different or opposing views. And he talks about how this clustering can be one of the elements that really divides and tears America apart. But I want to use this in the terms of, again, when we're talking about echo chambers and spin zone, those things, what happens when we are in communities, we don't have the social bonds and ties, going back to the great book, Bowling Alone. What happens when we don't have these engagements? When we don't have these engagements, as Bill Bishop suggests, we see anyone who disagrees with our viewpoints or our opinions as in opposition, not as a friend or not as someone that could be potentially a friend that potentially we disagree with. We see the kind of technology that has allowed us to be in these homogeneous communities, politically speaking. We know that segregation is something, racial segregation, those things that we are still grappling with, but we're beginning to see people sort based on political alignment. So Lee McIntyre talks about being in what we call a post-truth era. I think, therefore I am, I believe, therefore I am, where feelings now have trumped facts. So even if you have information and data and those things, that may not be enough, getting back to the communication piece, to convince or persuade someone to listen to your side. So three things that he brought out in his post-truth that we are all guilty of, myself and everyone, is cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is when you hear new information that competes with existing information that doesn't align, and it causes attention. So your behavior and actions kind of change or morph because of that. The reason why this is important, you all, because when we are threatened in that sense, our ideas or those things, we have a tendency to harpen down even further on our beliefs. Going back to that attitude shell. Attitude is that I'm protecting my beliefs and value system. Cognitive bias, we all know that what we talk about, confirmation bias. Again, we like to hear things that we agree with. And I got one C word that I'm going to suggest as a solution to this. But cognitive bias, if you don't think you're cognitive bias, if you look at sports or those things, think about how you watch sports. You never see fans of the opposing team ever saying, hey, the official got that call wrong when it favored their team. They're usually okay with it. So what cognitive bias means that we can't even see our own biases, and they can impact us in a great way. And then social conformity, not wanting to be the person to move away from the crowd. And McIntyre talks about this, that this can be a powerful weapon, even if we're in a room and we suggest, or someone suggests, and we think that we are on the outskirts of the popular behavior, we do what we call the silencing effect, where we won't conform to that. The last thing, very last thing, is where are we going? Now, we just talked about video, politics on demand with media. We talked about the new form where we have the filter bubbles. This is even scarier. What's scary is the new thing that is called deep fakes, where you can't even tell what's real and what's not real. And this, you all, frightens me because we know that the misinformation, disinformation will continue. But what happens when you have individuals who, for whatever reason, can't distinguish something real from something false? So all of this is being thrust upon Americans in the world, and it's a really interesting time to be in. And what I'm going to do now, I just wanted to end with that and open it up for like a lively conversation on anything that I've shared and discussed, what we think about these things. Thank you all for being so kind. I know I'm 6 minutes over. I wanted it just to be 30 minutes, but I really appreciate you all. So what questions or comments do we have about our current conversations, communication? Questions?
It looks like we've got one in chat here.
Okay.
Emotional intelligence, which was the subject at the last workshop, asks us to consider and try to understand others' perspectives on an emotional level. Relativism tells us that truth can vary from culture to culture. Both of those approaches to the world are very helpful and fruitful, but how do we separate them from the notion that you described, which is, I believe, therefore I'm right?
Okay. All right. That's
you can blame Dr. Phillips for that one.
Okay.
You're welcome.
Okay. So if I'm understanding what was asked, it was basically suggesting, how do we distinguish And Matt, let me make sure I'm understanding it correctly. So how do we distinguish fact? Is that correct? Fact from belief? Is that?
Or even just how to approach the other person if you see somebody who's totally within their own echo chamber and repeating falsehoods, disinformation, misinformation. How can you tell somebody they're wrong, perhaps, while also still being aware of emotional intelligence and the idea that different people do have different perspectives worth respecting? Because at the end of the day, there is wrong, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's a great question. So I'm going to give you my communication response, and then I'm going to give you Professor McIntyre, who talks a little bit about, like, he has a new book that's looking at data, scientific evidence, and those things. And he talks about what happens when that is even like challenged in those things. So from a communication optimistic perspective, Matt, the first thing is the message, the messenger of the message. And I'm going to just use some of the work that I've done when someone doesn't want to hear a truth that is being hurled. So when we look at gender violence and we look at violence against women, when I used to do that work, I would go in, well, before I did the work and how I got recruited, Matt, to do the work, my great mentor, Dr. Mitchell, would go in and speak to just till she was exhausted about male privilege, those things. And they would be like this, like, wouldn't listen. So I would go in and say some of the same stuff that Dr. Mitchell's saying, and I would get from certain men like, hey, you know what? That's a great point. I never thought of it. So one of the things that we can't overcome is the messenger, because the messenger, and because it gets to the second thing, talking about trust. There's a trust element as well. So I know when I go in and I'm talking to someone that has different views and opposing views, I know that I don't have the credibility or the credibility from this person to actually try to change or to actually try to get into a debate. I don't think that's productive for me to do it, because the thing is, man, when we talk about emotional intelligence, Chris Hedges' book Empire of Illusion: The Rise of Spectacle and the Triumph of Spectacle, the Decline of Literature. So you can give someone data and statistics all day, but if this person feels a certain way, that's not going to help you in a debate. Another thing, storytelling with data is also a powerful thing. Walter Fisher suggests that we are, as humans, we are storytellers. We love to listen to stories. We love to hear stories and tell stories. So one of the things, instead of trying to put data on people, I always try to like use a pathos of narrative and trying to find commonality in those different types of things. But if we can't even start at a basis of fact, that's very difficult. It's very difficult to have a conversation if we can't all agree. And here's another thing, man. I don't know how we get there. I don't know how we get there if we're starting from different truths. If my truth is over here on YouTube, your truth was on Twitter, how do we even get to that? I know that was long-winded, man.
Well, the question was long-winded, so I thank you. And not to self-promote, but the discussion for the next session will actually be on that wavelength of humans do crave stories and telling stories, as opposed to just the spouting off of facts. So I think just recognizing common humanity is part of it. But yeah, it's thorny.
And acknowledgement too. I think acknowledgement is a huge thing for me as a communication person. It's not for me to try to get someone to agree per se with my perspective, but just to try to get them to understand it. And
Mhm.
even to get them to understand it, I have to build trust there. And I have to do empathetic reasoning. I have to see where that person is coming from. A lot of people don't like to do that, Matt. A lot of people say, well, they should just get it. They should just get it.
Yeah.
And how could they possibly think that? And I guess that's just my communication brain. I just see how I always start where is this person starting from? Where are they starting from? And how can I figure a way to gain trust to move this person? Here's another thing too, Matt, to answer your question. A lot of times we want to be right in these things, and maybe that's not the goal or the intent that needs to be. The goal or the intent may be to just leave the information. Here's the information. I know you disagree, but here's some information, and you can pick it up and process it. You know, when you want to when you want to go to that information. So those are just some things, and I'm speaking, Matt, from a individual how I perceive it versus right, wrong.
And I would say from personal experience, the same has happened to me where I might not change my mind in the moment, but if somebody's communicated well, those ideas are bouncing around in my brain. And it could be like 5 months down the road that it actually finally hits me, but it sticks. So just putting the ideas out there.
And we had someone ask, how do you know what's really true when there's so much bias and opinion, especially on the news?
Mm-hmm. So I want someone. I mean, we need just a little bit of clarity because first we have to define what news are they referring to? Are they referring to the infotainment news? Are they referring to newspapers? Or I was just trying to see what, like, when they say news, what news are they referring to?
CBS, Fox. So it sounds like the big,
The
like,
big.
yeah.
Well, my suggestion would be to do the number one C. Well, communication is a big C, but the other one is being curious. You should be curious on information that you consume. Now, here's another thing. I'm going to just go out ahead and just put this out here is that we've seen a dismantling of expertise. We've seen that. There's a great book by a conservative. His name is Tom Nichols, and it's called The Death of Expertise. The Death of Expertise, and basically what he's getting at is what this question is lying on, is that it's good to be skeptical. It's good to question information. It's good to be curious. But he said we've gone and swing the pendulum so far on the other side that experts now are not being believed per se. So he would mention that he wrote the book based on he wrote it in a little short blurb, but his big thing was he was talking to like experts like dentists that have practiced, have gone to school for 20 years, and they were suggesting when people come into their practices, before they can even make their suggestions, someone would say, hey, you know what? Doc, this is what I want you to do, this, and the third. And they vehemently disagree with an expert. So it's okay to disagree, to be curious, to be skeptical. But I think what Tom Nichols has said, this has created a avenue where lay people's information is just as viable as an expert. And then we go back to the media. Someone said Fox and NBC and those things. When we look at that split screen and the WWF split screen, usually you'll have someone that has studied virology, experts and those things, and they're paired up against someone's opinion. So that's a very dangerous world that we're in when someone's opinion can trump an expert. Not saying that, as Tom Nichols said, not saying that experts can't be wrong. Experts can be wrong, but as he mentions that an expert conclusion in most cases, not all, are far closer than someone who has just looked it up on WebMD and those kind of things. And I think that's what the person is talking about what's true, what's not true. We've given validity of just any information in the information age. If it's on the internet, it must therefore be true.
Excuse me, are we
Yeah.
allowed to just ask questions?
Sure.
I didn't type it up, but just to build upon this expert, isn't that also a little bit more challenging now? Because what ends up happening, you have, quote, experts who come out of the woodwork who aren't experts. I mean, you have, quote, experts about the coronavirus. And here, I'll just pick something. I'll go vaccines. There were experts who claim that if you take the vaccine, you're going to magnetize yourself. And so what's happening is people, to your point, are propping up others as experts to support their position.
Absolutely.
So it is challenging to it's challenging to take an expert at face value. Something I do is if I hear something, I try to look for red flags, and then I go through multiple sources to try to piece what the actual picture is. So just FYI, I just think it's hard because of the false experts that are being propped up nowadays. So,
Jerry, that's wonderful, man. I'm not going to say much on that, Jerry, because you kind of knocked it out the park. So Jerry, here's the thing that we know, and let's look at it from a human perspective, like the human perspective. So Jerry, you are absolutely right on this. Going back to that disinformation and misinformation, people are just exhausted. They're exhausted, and they want, and it's another thing. I know I'm throwing a bunch of theories, y'all. I'm a big theory head. Uncertainty reduction. When we get inundated with so much media, so many this person's an expert, this person's an expert, you just get tired and you just want something simplified. And that's kind of what's going on, where you said, Jerry, you are listening with a critical ear. That's number one. And Jerry, I'm going to go back to say that you're doing what I do. And the number one thing I think that everyone should do, you're just curious. I'm going to listen to this expert, but I'm going to cross-check and referee what this expert has said. But here's the problem. Over 85% of people who hear something for the first time, be it on the internet, those things, basically take it at face value. They don't do a fact check and those different types of things. And this is why, Jerry, this is really scary. This is what I think is going to happen with the deep fakes. So the deep fakes are going to come in, and you're going to have people that they're just going to get tired. And it's not because people are finding media or finding things that they agree with. They're just trying to find some kind of common. Now, I'm tired. I work all day. And now I have 4 people telling me that this is what I should be doing for the coronavirus, or I should be doing this, and I should be doing this, I should be doing this. So that's the confusion. That's the problem that we're in with this multimedia. And another thing, Jerry, I think we need to be in schools. And we need to be in schools to teach students at an early age how to be curious and how to be critical of the media and content that they receive. And you can do that from a nonpartisan way. I think that's one thing that needs to be suggested. But thank you, Jerry. You spot on, man.
And I will give credit to my teachers for raising that curiosity. So yes, that is a true statement, and they get all the credit.
Yes.
So Derek, during your presentation, you said a couple of things, and I'm trying to make them make sense together in my head here. So
Okay.
Early on, you were talking about how early journalism like Cronkite was more objective, and I kind of look at objectivity as whatever biases you have, whatever makes you comfortable. Before you examine a topic, you take all those things and you tie them to a tree outside.
Okay.
Like, if you're going to be objective, you can't look at something based on what you believe. You look at something based on what the facts are, right? So if you're trying to get someone out of an echo chamber, out of a spin zone, I think that sometimes one of our challenges is that, if their spin zone is over here and we're over here, we want to get them over here, right? We want them to get, we want people to see our side of things. Is there an argument to be made for trying to get back to the small number of more objective sources that are out there, the ones that intentionally don't try to persuade you one way or the other, and try and steer people who might be occupying either a really far left viewpoint or a really far right viewpoint, and say, well, what about the way that this centrist thing reports it? I mean, is there any logic to that, or would you
Yeah.
try and recommend a different technique to maybe get them to break out of that area where they get most of their info?
That's a great no, John. I agree. I think that's great. But I think, John, I don't think with the technology, I just don't know how to do that. I don't know how to do that. If someone is on their Facebook page and they, because the algorithms, as we know, are going to just give them more of the same thing and get clustered to more like-minded people. And that time that I was talking about with just like a baseline of here's what we all agree on, I don't know how we get back to that because we're not consuming the same media. So that's what makes it difficult to me, John. I haven't figured out a way to even try to get us close to that. And then with the deep fakes and stuff going out, and it's literally people that really believe like they value. And I don't know how you can move somebody out of that. Because I think an echo chamber, you had some chance, and remember too, John, we also have to think about how culture is influencing this too. When I grew up, you had to be in my neighborhood. You had to be in conversation with liberal, conservative, centrist, all of those different type of things. But literally, we can live in a community where, again, going back to the big sword, we're only talking to people that agree with us, and then when we come up against someone that disagrees, we immediately go to our defense mechanisms. Oh, this person is just a moron. This person don't know what they're talking about and those things. So, John, I don't know how to put the water back in the bottle to get to objectivity. I don't think we'll see it anytime soon. And here's another thing, John, just to your point. Tom Nichols and a lot of the experts say, when will we get back to like some level? Of course, we know it's not it's no absolute truth, an exception to the rule. They suggested, and Tom Nichols wrote his book before the pandemic. And a lot of the experts suggested that it would take a major pandemic or something like that, where people would humble themselves and listen or try to come up with some kind of objective ways of and what the research is showing right now, John, is that that's actually the opposite is happening. People are hearkening down on their pre-existing, and they're conforming their ideology based on their biases. So a pandemic, the only thing, John, we have left is like a alien attack. But the pandemic didn't work.
I just put that in the comments at the same second you said that. You have it here. Tri-C advocates an alien attack to bring us together.
Well, so did anybody else have any questions or observations after Dr. Williams' presentation?
This is Magda. Thank you for all this. This is fascinating conversation. I was just taken back to the time where we would watch our local news and, like, okay, did we really pay attention to the lack of objectivity? But even now, like now knowing that these major news networks like MSNBC, and then you've got Fox News on the other side, like, you're going to watch one or the other based on how you lean, right? It's inevitable. But you should still be able to watch your local news and not have, You know, I mean, you still should be able to receive an objective point of view where you're hearing both sides to a story or other sides to a story, so that you, as a person who's an audience member, could decide, you know, what to believe. Even like your NPR news in the morning when you're driving into work, and you're just like, there was a time where I felt like it was so much more objective. You would hear the experts, you would hear the story, and then you would bring in those experts, and then you'd hear the opposing view, you know, and you'd decide, oh, okay, yeah, you know, that other person is not right, but you know, you make that decision, right? You don't have them make the decision for you. But I think less and less, because of this divide that we're in, this divisive world that we're in, it just feels like even our local news has become subjective. So that's just me, you know, ranting.
Thank you, Dr. Gomez. And Dr. Gomez, I'm going to just extend that. I totally agree with you on that. But we're think about this, you all. That's why the deep fakes, I am terrified by the deep fakes. Because now we have, if we're looking at generation, the millennials, and we look at Gen Z, they have come up with, they don't even have an idea of like anything near objective news. It's basically, again, my phone, and I can go to the news. Why would I even do that? So that's even a question in the text. And I was so sad, Dr. Gomez, because this is one of the this professor was one of the people that worked behind the scenes in C-SPAN. And I loved C-SPAN when I was much younger, because I used to love the Washington Journal. And you could get up and, man, you couldn't hear just a left side, you couldn't hear just a right side. They had the independent. And that was like, what, about 15 years ago. I just loved that show. But then it even became where it was such like vitriol and stuff. I had to stop watching it. And I was just really sad about that, because that was a 3-hour show. I could learn about politics, and I could get the different types of positions and those things. And it just made me sad when I had to turn that off, because people were calling in, you know, on the different lines and vilifying this person and vilifying this person. And I just don't think, you all, not to be a gloom and doom person, I think it's gonna have to, it's gonna even get worse before it gets better. That's what I think. I don't think we're just gonna wake up one day and people are gonna say, hey, I want to hear something that's objective to my viewpoint. I don't think it's gonna happen.
So we had someone ask, when exactly did the news become so biased, or was it just a slow process over time?
It was what they call it was a slow burn. It was a slow burn, because as you mentioned, John and Dr. Gomez, what you all mentioned, even CBS, right? They weren't totally objective. They were curators of national news and those things. But I had a better chance when I tuned into into that news segment in 1955, 61, that I would be able to get some type of baseline. And someone in Omaha got that same baseline, and we were able to work from that perspective. So as it kind of evolved, the opinionated, and here's where it really broke down, y'all. With the 24-hour news cycles, the opinionated was more, it allured more people. It was more entertaining. And the second thing too, it was cheaper to produce. So it was cheaper to produce a constant like infotainment than it was to hire someone to go and do investigative journalism and those different types of things. Another thing, being such a news person as a kid, my uncle, thanks to this, 60 Minutes. 60 Minutes was the first profitable news investigation a show that actually turned a profit. And then we see Ted Koppel come with the nighttime, nighttime or Nightline. And we started to see this slow progression, but I really pointed at the 24 cycle, give the people what they want, and it needs to be opinionated. It needs to be WWF style. We'll debate short segments, and it wasn't this kind of long, deliberate kind of nuance. And and as a culture, we have also gotten in a hurry. We're in a hurry now. We don't want information. And when we look at these hot pressing topics, it takes more than a 5 minutes soundbite to, and this is what the commentators always, oh, we're out of time, we're gonna leave it there, we'll bring you back on. And like, nothing got solved. Like they just shouted at each other. It is really unfortunate. Really is.
Well, and speaking of hot pressing topics, this is kind of a 60 minutes worthy question here. Do you believe that social media should be more closely regulated? I mean, is it time to attack the spin zones by regulating social media?
I would say it needs to be some type of mechanism that I don't know how we set that up. I don't know if we try to make it independent, because one of the suspicions would be if we do regulate it, then what happens when it, and who and by whom? But I do think that it needs to be reeled in, because a great segment, 60 Minutes, you all was talking about 60 Minutes. 60 Minutes has a segment from an insider in these tech companies. His name is Tristan. There's a great documentary on Netflix called Social Dilemma. But Tristan worked for Google, and he was interviewed by 60 Minutes called Brain Hacking. And it basically looks at how new social media has deliberately created social psychologists to work with coding as a way to keep us tied to the news cycles and the spins. Like on your phone, you have the endless stream, it doesn't stop, those different types of things. So I think it needs to be some type of regulation, because the corporations, like, why would Facebook have an incentive to look for the betterment of society? That's not their job. They're in it to make money and keep eyeballs on their site and the likes of that nature. It also was a Facebook whistleblower on 60 Minutes as well. So yes, that's to answer my question. It needs to be reeled in, absolutely. By whom, we can have a discussion about that.
Can I bounce off that real quick?
Yes.
Because one of the things is, if there's regulations, do you create new ones that American law before had never considered, or do you go back to older laws? And I'm thinking of antitrust laws where giant businesses can be broken up.
Well, and Mindy in the chat had just brought up a return to the fairness doctrine
Oh,
that
yeah.
went out the window
Yes.
in the 80s. That's a really good observation.
Absolutely. That's true. Yes, absolutely.
Well, I guess what I was wondering with the antitrust is if it even would be helpful, or if it would just lead to more division, because then everybody would have their own social media niche.
Yes, and here's another thing to think about, Professor Matt, to get to what you're getting at. I would, going back, that would be something that we can like look at elements of those things. But the thing with technology, as Sherry Turkle, MIT professor, suggests, is that it is produced so rapidly and so fast that the laws can't. Tim Wu too, the guy that created net neutrality, the term, he says that the technology morphs so fast, by the time we even regulate or come up with laws, try to get it passed through a legislative branch and those things, it's morphed into something else. So I think it's going to have to be a social kind of a plea to individuals, like a social plea, as well as looking at some of these things that you all mentioned, like the antitrust, fairness doctrine, and the likes. So I think it's a combination of things.
Well, gosh, look at that. It's 3:07. Well, did we want to go ahead and leave it here, or I know you
I think
probably
this
got
was a
places to be.
fascinating talk, and I was taking notes the whole time for what I can talk about at the next session. So I very much enjoyed it myself.
And I guess that does lead us into our last workshop of this series, which is Statues, Fascists, and Memory: The Use and Abuse of History. So we don't know if we might see some Confederate statues or references to the good old days, but this is definitely going to be a workshop that I'm looking forward to hearing. So hopefully we see everybody at the last one of the season. And Dr. Williams, again, thank you very much for contributing your time and your expertise today.
Thank you all. Have a great day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And once we find out where we can host recordings, I'll let everybody know. We did record this today, and we've also recorded the previous 2 sessions as well.
Okay. All right. Thanks all.
Thank you.
I'll stick around if anybody wants to chat.
Ditto.
Jameer, are you still there? Oh, let me stop recording.